Hello all, my name is Cindy. I'm an engineer at Amplitude. As a senior engineer, I've worked on many products with many great PMs. One thing I've learned is that having access to information helps teams make better decisions together. That's why I love working at Amplitude. We are the leader in product intelligence. Over 40,000 teams and 25 of the Fortune 100 now use Amplitude to better understand how customers interact with their digital products and what drives growth. Today I'm going to demo three main features of Amplitude: product analytics, data management, and behavioral targeting. To show you the power of Amplitude, I want to walk you through a use case in our demo account. The demo account mimics a music streaming service and is available for anyone to experiment with through our website. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to pretend to be the PM of sharing songs, looking for insight into my product and ways to influence performance. Events are actions that happen in your product, which can be client-side events taken directly by a user or server-side events taken in response to a user. I might have worked with my team to instrument the share song or share event as the PM of share. When you use Amplitude's SDK to track event behavior, we automatically log some common user properties like country and device type. I can select the device type in the right side, which selects users. You can also instrument your own custom user properties like items purchased or total spent. To dig into a specific event or event property, you can use this chart, the event segmentation chart, which helps you understand how segments of users perform certain actions during a certain time period. Think of this as the chart to answer questions starting with the phrase, how many? All of our charts return information in real time so you can get insights as soon as you start sending data. So, I aggregate by the share event and I can see how many users are sharing on a daily basis. I can also get the real-time information related to this query. If I wanted to see something at a higher level, I could just select weekly, monthly, or quarterly aggregations. Here I'm seeing that 2,000 users on Apple iPhone are sharing every week. If I wanted to see how many shares they're generating, I can click Event Totals. I'm seeing them sharing about 10,000 shares a week, which would correlate to about 5 shares per user. Let's say that I wanted to know what the most popular platform to share to was and how many users were sharing to it. You can instrument event properties to further give context about an event at the time it's triggered. Instrumenting the right event properties allow you to do some amazing analysis in Amplitude. If I wanted to know about the platform of a share event, I could instrument the social platform event property with my team. I can see that the most shared to platform is Facebook, and there's twice as many Facebook shares as the next platform. That's an interesting insight, and I might choose to make a decision based off of that information. I love this chart because of how easy it is to explore event data and get to the bottom of the questions I want to answer. At any point on a chart in Amplitude, the product can be further inspected if you want to gather more information on that data point. I can see what events a user typically performed after sharing to user paths. I can also see the specific user streams, which is the order of events that happen on a per user basis. I could also use this list of users for this specific data point to create a cohort, which I will explain later. Finally, I could download the list of users for further analysis. If I wanted to understand how users got to the share event, I could use another chart in Amplitude called Pathfinder, which shows the events that happen prior to the event you want to learn about, or directly after. The event I care about is share, and I want to find events that happen prior to that. As the PM of share, I could use Pathfinder to understand which events typically happen before sharing. I can cascade this analysis for the common events prior to the event I'm focusing on to find a full path. I see that users are generally playing a song, favoring it, and then sharing. Once I think I know the common path that users perform to take an action, I can then create a funnel that tells me the conversion between each step of the funnel. In the example where I'm PM of share, I might use people who played a song, favorited it, and then shared. We can see a significant drop-off between the users who favorited a song and the users who shared a song. Again, I can click into this data point and get more information about it. I'm going to explore the conversion drivers of this event. The conversion drivers will show me the events correlated with dropping off or converting. So if you dropped off, you were part of the set of users who didn't do share but had done favorite song. And if you converted, you did both of those events in order. These are all the events that happened between them so that we can understand what events might cause users to share. However, it's important to note that these are correlational. Now let's say I wanted to understand how sharing relates to user retention. I can create a cohort of users who shared to understand how they relate to the rest of my users. So I'm going to create a cohort for the set of users who shared at least once in the last 30 days. Notice a few things from this analysis. We can see that the population of the cohort over time is. This is very similar to the previous query I had done in event segmentation. In comparisons, I can see the comparison of this cohort to my active users, but I could change the cohort that I wanted to compare it to. I can see the user comparison between the two for common user properties, the average active events, the unique active users for the two groups, and finally, I can see the difference in user retention for the two groups of users. So the insight I gained from this cohort comparison retention analysis is that the user retention is much higher if a user shares a song compared to the average user. Amplitude has tools that help you take action on your product insights like this one. One of them is predictive cohorts. To find the people who are likely to do an action, you can use a feature called predictive cohorting, which uses machine learning to predict who will share in the future. I'm excited to show you this feature because I helped build it. We're going to define a new predictive cohort. The way we define this is to define a starting cohort. So we want to select anyone who did an active event in the last 30 days, but who did not share. And we want to predict if they are going to share in the next week. Now, usually predictive cohorts take about an hour to train, so I'm going to pull a baked pie out of the oven for convenience and show you what it looks like when it finishes training. When you're looking at the analysis of my prediction, you can see stats on the performance of the model at the top of the page. The model can predict users who are likely to share a video because the accuracy is above 50%. What's being shown in this graph is a distribution of all users who have not shared in the last 30 days, as we define in our starting cohort. Amplitude is forecasting from those users who is most likely to share in the next week. So, we see the graph is really helpful to identify high and low likelihood people. The top 20% are the most likely to actually share, but haven't shared yet. They're the best users for me to focus interventions on. You also have a way to explain why the users selected are the best with the table below. As a PM of share, I can see events that are highly correlated with my best users. I can see that the purchase a song event was done by 60% of my users in the high likelihood range, but only 14% of my users in the lower likelihood. That gives me more insights to dive into, but also justifies why these users are high likelihood. So, predictive cohorts lets you identify who are your best users to do some action on. Once you've identified them, you can save your high likelihood users to a cohort and then take some action on them. So, you can sync lists of users into all the other tools that you as a product manager and growth team might use. We support many different destinations. For example, email tools like Braze, or experimentation tools like LaunchDarkly. Amplitude would sync these sets of users as soon as they have a high probability to actually share, and as a PM, I could use LaunchDarkly or some other experimentation tool to show these users a personalized experiment, incentivizing them to share at the right time. Or I could sync them into a Braze or some either other email campaign management tool to show them the right email message as soon as they reach this top probability. I can also use this cohort as a user filter in all the other charts I showed you earlier if I wanted to dive down deeper into why these users are high probability. Next, I'm going to talk about a really exciting feature called Govern. Something that all good companies in this space know is that you're only as good as your data. When you build out a list of events, event properties, and custom user properties, you're developing a taxonomy. Managing this taxonomy is achieved through data governance, a feature that we just released this year. Govern enables teams to plan, transform, and oversee their taxonomy within Amplitude, all without code. In Govern, I can quickly see all of my events, whether they're active, deactivated, or still in planning, their 30-day volume, and the number of charts the events are used in Amplitude for. If I click on a friend, or if I can click on an event, I can add useful information for my team to see when using this event in charts, like descriptions of event properties or images of where the event occurs in my app. Govern allows you to oversee your existing events, but it has some useful features to maintain the hygiene of your data as well. When developing your taxonomy, people might add multiple events that mean the same thing. You can merge events together in Govern to have them appear and function as the same event in your charts in Amplitude. You can also manage the consistency of your taxonomy through advanced features in Govern. When you start sending data to Amplitude, we take a guess at the definition of your schema based on the type of data you're sending us. Once you're happy with the schema that's controlled through Govern, you can monitor any derivations from the defined schema through the validation errors page. You can subscribe to get notified when a schema validation error occurs, which allows you to quickly iterate on any instrumentation errors. In totality, Amplitude helps with monitoring to improve your product outcomes. Amplitude helps with everything. Amplitude helps with product analysis by using any of our 10 product analytics charts, including the 4 I showed you today, event segmentation, pathfinder, funnel, or retention analysis. Amplitude helps with cohorts and predictive cohorts features to identify and target users to influence outcomes and increase performance by syncing into your product personalization tools like LaunchDarkly or Braze. Amplitude helps with data governance and communication with its taxonomy governance tool. If you'd like to learn more about Amplitude, or you have any questions at all, please stop by our booth or reach out through our website. Thank you all.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining me for an overview of the Gainsight PX platform. For those unfamiliar, Gainsight PX enables your team to deeply understand what users are doing in your product. It allows the team to begin collecting feedback through in-app surveys, as well as to go ahead and create some in-app engagements like walkthroughs and guides to better drive onboarding as well as adoption. Let's first go ahead and take a look at how an end user would experience some of these different engagements. Engagements themselves can be thought of as orchestrations targeting a specific audience of users at a defined time. Audience themselves can be defined based on the user or the account's demographics, their feature usage, custom events, or a combination of in-app behaviors. And guides themselves are really flexible in terms of how they can be configured. They can be a single-step tooltip, a single-step dialogue, or what we can do is start stringing them together to provide a sequence of tooltips and dialogues, which is one of the examples that we're looking at here. So this particular guide itself is pointing out key areas and providing some of these in-app videos within the application. So for that end user, they can know exactly what some of those different hotspots are. And a really great example of using some of these click-through guides would be an end user that's onboarding into the platform. And the guides themselves can be targeted based off of the different roles. So what an end user of the platform experiences from an onboarding perspective versus that business user, we might point out different areas, different key aspects within the platform that we want them to be concentrating on. And you can see here, just even within that guide, we can also prompt what that next step is. So whether it's scheduling that meeting, whether it's scheduling that kickoff call, we can make sure that that all gets incorporated into the guide itself. Another example of a guide that we might want to incorporate within the tool here is more of that click through, calling out some of these different tooltips here where we can embed URLs, we can embed tips and tricks type documents. So perhaps that we've noticed that a certain cohort of individuals, their adoption has been dropping. We want to make sure that the next time they log into the platform, they're aware of any of those different product releases, or they're aware of any of those different areas within the platform that we know are really going to drive up some of the different sticky features and some of the different adoption areas. Additionally, what we can also embed here is more of that feedback loop around surveys. So whether it's an NPS, what we're looking at right here, or some of those different open-ended comments or that ranking that we can embed directly within the platform itself, we've noticed that the response rate has been that much higher receiving some of these different survey outreaches in the application and in the platform versus reaching out in that traditional email sense. We'll also be able to close the loop on any of these responses. So whether it's a promoter response or a detractor response, we can make sure that we're kicking off a workflow for the team member here to follow up accordingly with some of those different individuals. And then finally, within that end user experience, what we can also embed is going to be a knowledge center bot. And the Knowledge Center bot is really an onboarding assistant that guides users both in learning your product as well as catching up on some of those different releases that potentially we've added into the platform itself. And these can be links to engagements. They can be external URLs that are really enabled to effectively onboard any of those new users, as well as educate those existing users. And also on top of the surveys, there's also going to be a feedback loop here where end users can add in any of their issues, add in any of those feature requests, or add in any of that general feedback. And the knowledge bot here is one example of an integration point that can be extended to Gainsight PX. So let's say the team has a knowledge center built out within Zendesk as an example. The documents already built out within Zendesk can be extended to Gainsight PX. It's also just one example of several other out-of-the-box integration points that we have with Gainsight PX to both pull and push any of this usage information back and forth. So let's switch gears here out of the end user experience and talk a little bit more about Gainsight PX as that direct user and how we can go ahead and get this set up. So to set up Gainsight PX, it's as simple as embedding this JavaScript code that you're seeing here into your product. A separate code can be installed to track what you can see here, mobile activity, as well as website activity. So this is really geared towards non-logged in users, but we can still see how they're navigating within the platform itself. And after this JavaScript code has been embedded, what this will do is provide a few different key functionalities. It's going to send your web application events, so things like sessions, page views, click views, back into the Gainsight PX subscription for the analytics purposes. It will also go ahead and send any identify information, so things like a user's first name, last name, email, company, etc., so that these events are not only captured, but they're also associated to the correct user and the correct account. This will also trigger any real-time engagement to that user. So what we were just looking at, whether it's a guide or a survey, the JavaScript code will really correct when we can send over some of those in-app engagements. And then what we'll do is go ahead and receive the details of the engagement. Was it completed? What were those survey results, etc. And after this JavaScript code has been installed, what the team will then have access to is the product mapper. And the product mapper feature allows you to model your product using a really simple tree-like structure that we're looking at here that's designed to help you quickly and effectively map your product features and associated that tracked user events into the corresponding feature and modules with zero type of coding. How we can get this set up is Gainsight will have a suggestion mode or an instant mapper here that will help the team by suggesting a list of features and modules to be included in your product tree. Gainsight will make these suggestions based on the CSS within your platform, but will still enable the team to map out any additional features in the product with a simple drag and drop or a simple add within the product tree itself in the product mapper. And also know that any features or modules added down the road within this particular view will still have activity associated. So if there is a new feature added 6 months after implementation, Gainsight can backfill that activity and associate it to a user or to an account. Okay. After all of this has been, set up and established, that one-click code installation, the product mapper itself, what we can then start doing is collecting a lot of the analytics within some of the different usage behavior. And the Gainsight analytics are going to be really flexible in terms of what we're looking at from a usage, from an adoption perspective. So my homepage dashboard here, this is going to show me any of those active users, those new users, any of those custom events that I've built out, what that looks like within that singular snapshot. And you can see here, again, this is going to be associated to our web app, but I could also pivot and start to look at some of those analytics from a mobile perspective. And for any of those users within Gainsight PX, the reporting and analytics become really flexible in terms of building out, let's say, your own particular views. So as that end user, I can build out my own homepage dashboard where I want to not only look at any of those active or those new users, but I also want to see those users broken down by our freemium platform and our freemium product there, any of those enterprise users, as well as what that overall sentiment looks like. So any of those Gainsight PX users will be able to start building out some of these different dashboards to make sure that they're looking at the right data at the right time based off of what they want to be concentrating on. And within the analytics even further, what we can start to do is not only understand just basic user activity, who's new within the platform, who has signed up within the last couple of days, but we can also start to dig into things like the click path here. So the path analyzer will help you visualize user activity and surface any of those unexpected behaviors. So within this particular view, we can start answering questions like how did they get to a given feature or where did they go next? The path analyzer is really going to allow you to learn not only about the adoption path and the first mile of that product for those new users, but it will also start to visualize any of those unexpected user flows. So you can start to track user activities to see how users got to a new feature and then where do they go to next. And a really common use case that we would see is that if we know that invoices, as an example here, is going to be a really sticky feature and drive adoption, how do we want to potentially rework some of this different click paths? How do we want to start incorporating some of those different in-app engagements so we can get to that invoice section even further and even more quickly? And all of the reports within here too, you can filter down on. So potentially we might want to see, as an example here, how different accounts or how different users are interacting and going through that different click path. We can see all of that information just directly within this particular view. Okay. Another example here where we might start to dig into is around our retention analysis. And a retention analysis will allow you to discover which features drive retention and growth, including the window of time that you have to guide users to realize the value of your product. And all of these too, we can start to filter down by different cohorts to understand how different account types, how different users might potentially be utilizing the tool and utilizing the platform itself. So this is really where we can come in to get to some of those different ideal engagements that we would want to incorporate into our platform for those end users. And this is really where you can start to understand how your product retains its users by establishing a baseline that we're looking at here and measuring that over time. You can also start to identify the window of time that you have to guide users to realize early value of your product, and then start to validate your hypotheses on which features and user attributes are going to drive retention as well as drive growth. And all of this information is really going to be key in terms of how we're thinking about building out some of those different engagements that you saw from that end user. So there's a number of different key engagements that we can start to build out. We looked at a couple of these, whether it was that dialogue, that slider, that in-app guide, or that survey component. But one really key differentiator here is that we can have engagements that are centered more on email as well. So if we've noticed that someone's not logging into the platform on a regular cadence, email would be a great way to try to re-engage them, bring them back into the platform, and hopefully drive up some of that different engagement. And in terms of creating the different engagements here, it's a really simple interface for that end user. So what we can start to do is build out the audience that we want to be targeting in this case. And we can look at users who have certain entitlements or certain roles. So I had mentioned going ahead and targeting some of those different onboarding engagements for, let's say, an admin within the application. We can make sure that that's a simple drag and drop within here. We can also make sure that this is going to certain segments. Or what we can also start to do is incorporate within here this idea of custom events. And custom events are special in that they can carry with them contextual information along with that event. So let's say that your product or platform has some search capability. A custom event call would be made when one of your users performs a search that will not only tell PX that a search event occurred, but it can also include, let's say, properties or payload as the search terms come back. So it can be really specific in terms of who we're targeting out with some of these different templates and some of these different engagements. And in terms of building this out, we want to make it really, really easy for that PX user to be able to come through here, set aside and grab any of those pre-existing templates, but within the editor, easily be able to, let's say, insert different images, insert different videos if they need to. And we've constructed this in such a way that we don't need any type of that CSS background, but you would still have access to if that's the preferred methodology for that end user. So we can make sure that whenever you're comfortable with in terms of building out any of these different engagements here, we'll have full access to be able to do so. And after any of these different templates and any of these different engagements get built out, I can preview them directly within the application but also go ahead and schedule exactly when some of these should be distributed. So it could be on just that one-time basis based off of the audience that I've sent out, or what I can make sure is that they're making this completed for some of these different engagements that we're sending until this stops popping up whenever they go into the tool. So really flexible there in terms of how we're starting to think about that. And extending this a little bit further, even into the CS type notion as well, what we can also start to do here is take all of that key PX information that we're looking at and look at it more from that CS perspective, where all of that key information, whether it's an adoption perspective, any of the different login information that we're collecting here, we can make sure that this is also being incorporated for the customer success team, where they would collect all of that great PX data that we're looking at, any of that in-app engagement here. They can see it directly from a customer 360 and even extend that even further into the scorecard, where they're collecting all of that PX data, whether it's adoption or whether that it's that engagement, and pouring it into more of that health score view. So we can not only close the loop on what some of that activity looks like, but also drive workflow off of that as well. Okay. All right. A ton of different functionality that we can have from the Gainsight PX tool, whether it's, again, collecting that usage information, driving some of those in-app engagements, and configuring those in-app engagements without any type of coding. Appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much.